1,000 Miles Up the Nile, Section 57. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 1,000 Miles Up the Nile by Amelia B. Edwards. Chapter 19, Back Through Nubia, Part 3. Tafa is charmingly placed, and the 7 miles which divide it from Kalebsha, once no doubt the scene of a cataract, are perhaps the most picturesque on this side of Wadi Halfa. Rocky islets in the river, palm groves, acacias, carobs, henna and castorberry bushes, and all kinds of flowering shrubs along the edges of the banks, fantastic precipices riven and pinnacled, here rising abruptly from the water's edge, and there from the sandy plain, make lovely sketches whichever way one turns. There are gazelles, it is said, in the ravines behind Tafa, and one of the natives, a truculent fellow in a ragged shirt and dirty white turban, tells how, at a distance of 3 hours up a certain glen, there is another berba larger than either of these in the plain, and a great standing statue taller than 3 men. Here, then, if the tale be true, is another ready-made discovery for whoever may care to undertake it. This same native, having sold a necklace to the idle man and gone away content with his bargain, comes back by and by with half the village at his heels, requiring double price. This modest demand being refused, he rages up and down like a maniac, tears off his turban, goes through a wild manual exercise with his spear, then sits down in stately silence with his friends and neighbors drawn up in a semicircle behind him. This, it seems, is Nubian for a challenge. He has thrown down his gauntlet in form, and demands trial by combat. The noisy crowd, meanwhile, increases every moment. Rais Hassan looks grave, fearing a possible fracas, and the idle man, who is reading the morning service down below, for it is on a Sunday morning, can scarcely be heard for the clamour outside. In this emergency it occurs to the writer to send a message ashore informing these gentlemen that the Hawajis are holding a mosque in the dahabeah, and entreating them to be quiet till the hour of prayer is past. The effect of the message, strange to say, is instantaneous. The angry voices are at once hushed. The challenger puts on his turban. The assembled spectators squat in respectful silence on the bank. A whole hour goes by thus, giving the storm time to blow over, and when the idle man reappears on deck, his would-be adversary comes forward quite pleasantly to discuss the purchase afresh. It matters little how the affair ended, but I believe he was offered his necklace back in exchange for the money paid, and preferred to abide by his bargain. It is as evidence of the sincerity of the religious sentiment in the minds of a semi-savage people that I have thought the incident worth telling. We are now less than 40 miles from Philae, but the head wind is always against us, and the men's bread is exhausted, and there is no flour to be bought in these Nubian villages. The poor fellows swept out the last crumbs from the bottom of their bread chests 3 or 4 days ago, and are now living on quarter rations of lentil soup and a few dried dates bought at Wadi Halfa. Patient and depressed, they crouch silently beside their oars, or forget their hunger in sleep. For ourselves it is painful to witness their need, and still more painful to be unable to help them. Ptolemy, whose own stores are at a low ebb, vows he can do nothing. It would take his few remaining tins of preserved meat to feed 15 men for 2 days, and of flour he has barely enough for the Hawajis. Hungry, well, yes, no doubt they are hungry, but what of that? They are Arabs, and Arabs bear hunger as camels bear thirst. It is nothing new to them. They have often been hungry before, they will often be hungry again. Enough, it is not for the ladies to trouble themselves about such fellows as these. Excellent advice, no doubt, but hard to follow. Not to be troubled, and not to do what little we can do for the poor lads, is impossible. When that little means laying violent hands on Ptolemy's reserve of eggs and biscuits, and getting up lotteries for prizes of chocolate and tobacco, that worthy evidently considers that we have taken leave of our wits. Under a burning sky we touch for an hour or 2 at Gertesi, and then push on for Dabud. The limestone quarries at Gertasi are full of votive sculptures and inscriptions, and the little ruin, a mere cluster of graceful columns supporting a fragment of cornice, stands high on the brink of a cliff overhanging the river. Take it as you will, from above or below, looking north or looking south, it makes a charming sketch. If transported to Dabod on that magic carpet of the fairy tale, one would take it for a ruin on the beached margin of some placid lake in dreamland. It lies between two bends of the river, which here flows wide, showing no outlet and seeming to be girdled by mountains and palm groves. The temple is small and uninteresting, begun like Dhaka by an Ethiopian king and finished by Ptolemies and Caesars. The one curious thing about it is a secret cell, most cunningly devised. Adjoining the sanctuary is a dark side chamber. In the floor of the side chamber is a pit, once paved over. In one corner of the pit is a manhole opening into a narrow passage, and in the narrow passage are steps leading up to a secret chamber constructed in the thickness of the wall. We saw other secret chambers in other temples, but not one in which the old approaches were so perfectly preserved. From Dabad to Philae is but 10 miles, and we are bound for Torigur, which is 2 miles nearer. Now Torigur is that same village at the foot of the beautiful sand drift near which we moored on our way up the river, and here we are to stay 2 days, followed by at least a week at Philae. No sooner, therefore, have we reached Torigur than Rais Hassan and 3 sailors start for Aswan to buy flour. Old Ali, Rizq Ali, and Musa, whose homes lie in the villages round about, get leave of absence for a week, and we find ourselves reduced all at once to a crew of 5, with only Khalifa in command. 5, however, are as good as 50 when the dahabeah lies moored and there is nothing to do, and our 5, having succeeded in buying some flabby Nubian cakes and green lentils, are now quite happy. So the painter sketches the ruined convent opposite, and L and the little lady write no end of letters, and the idle man with Mehemet Ali for a retriever shoots quail, and everybody is satisfied. Hapless idle man! Hapless but homicidal, if he had been content to shoot only quail, and had not taken to shooting babies! What possessed him to do it? Not, let us hope, an ill-directed ambition, foiled of crocodiles. He went serene and smiling, with his gun under his arm, and Mehemet Ali in his wake. Who so light of heart as that idle man? Who so light of heel as that turbaned retriever? We heard our sportsman popping away presently in the barley. It was a pleasant sound, for we knew his aim was true. Every shot, said we, means a bird. We little dreamed that one of those shots meant a baby. All at once a woman screamed. It was a sharp, sudden scream, following a shot, a scream with a ring of horror in it. Instantly it was caught up from point to point, growing in volume and seeming to be echoed from every direction at once. At the same moment the bank became alive with human beings. They seemed to spring from the soil, women shrieking and waving their arms, men running, all making for the same goal. The rider heard the scream, saw the rush, and knew at once that a gun accident had happened. A few minutes of painful suspense followed. Then Mehemet Ali appeared, tearing back at the top of his speed, and presently, perhaps 5 minutes later, though it seemed like 20, came the idle man, walking very slowly and defiantly, with his head up, his arms folded, his gun gone, and an immense rabble at his heels. Our scanty crew, armed with sticks, flew at once to the rescue, and brought him off in safety. We then learned what had happened. A flight of quail had risen, and as quail fly low, skimming the surface of the grain and diving down again almost immediately, he had taken level aim. At the instant that he fired, and in the very path of the quail, a woman and child who had been squatting in the barley sprang up screaming. He at once saw the coming danger, and with admirable presence of mind drew the charge of his second barrel. He then hid his cartridge box and hugged his gun, determined to hold it as long as possible. The next moment he was surrounded, overpowered, had the gun wrenched from his grasp, and received a blow on the back with a stone. Having captured the gun, 1 or 2 of the men let go. It was then that he shook off the rest, and came back to the boat. Mehemet Ali at the same time flew to call a rescue. He too came in for some hard knocks, besides having his shirt rent and his turban torn off his head. Here were we, meanwhile, with less than half our crew, a private war on our hands, no captain, and one of our 3 guns in the hands of the enemy. What a scene it was! A whole village, apparently a very considerable village, swarming on the bank, all hurrying to and fro, all raving, shouting, gesticulating. If we had been on the verge of a fracas at Taffa, here we were threatened with a siege. Drawing in the plank between the boat and the shore, we held a hasty council of war. The woman being unhurt, and the child, if hurt at all, hurt very slightly, we felt justified in assuming an injured tone, calling the village to account for a case of cowardly assault, and demanding instant restitution of the gun. We accordingly sent Ptolemy to parley with the head man of the place, and peremptorily demand the gun. We also bade him add, and this we regarded as a master stroke of policy, that if due submission was immediately made, the Hawaji, one of whom was a Hakim, would permit the father to bring his child on board and have its hurts attended to. Outwardly indifferent, inwardly not a little anxious, we waited the event. Ptolemy's back being towards the river, we had the whole semicircle of swarthy faces full in view, bent brows, flashing eyes, glittering teeth, all anger, all scorn, all defiance. Suddenly the expression of the faces changed, the change beginning with those nearest the speaker and spreading gradually outwards. It was as if a wave had passed over them. We knew then that our coup was made. Ptolemy returned. The villagers crowded round their leaders, deliberating. Numbers now began to sit down, and when a Nubian sits down you may be sure that he is no longer dangerous. Presently, after perhaps a quarter of an hour, the gun was brought back uninjured, and an elderly man carrying a blue bundle appeared on the bank. The plank was now put across, the crowd was kept off, and the man with the bundle and 3 or 4 others were allowed to pass. The bundle being undone, a little brown imp of about 4 years of age, with a shaven head and shaggy scalp lock, was produced. He whimpered at first, seeing the strange white faces, but when offered a fig, forgot his terrors and sat munching it like a monkey. As for his wounds, they were literally skin deep, the shot having but slightly grazed his shoulders in 4 or 5 places. The idle man, however, solemnly sponged the scratches with warm water, and L. covered them with patches of sticking plaster. Finally the father was presented with a Napoleon, the patient was wrapped in one of his murderer's shirts, and the first act of the tragedy ended. The second and third acts were to come. When the painter and the idle man talked the affair over, they agreed that it was expedient, for the protection of future travellers, to lodge a complaint against the village, and this mainly on account of the treacherous blow dealt from behind, at a time when the idle man, who had not once attempted to defend himself, was powerless in the hands of a mob. They therefore went next day to Aswan, and the governor, charming as ever, promised that justice should be done. Meanwhile we moved the dahabeah to Philae, and there settled down for a week's sketching. Next evening came a woeful deputation from Toriger, entreating forgiveness and stating that 15 villagers had been swept off to prison. The idle man explained that he no longer had anything to do with it, that the matter, in short, was in the hands of justice, and would be dealt with according to law. Hereupon the spokesman gathered up a handful of imaginary dust, and made believe to scatter it on his head. "O dragoman," he said, "tell the Hawaji that there is no law but his pleasure, and no justice but the will of the governor." Summoned next morning to give evidence, the idle man went betimes to Aswan, where he was received in private by the governor and Mutter. Pipes and coffee were handed, and the usual civilities exchanged. The governor then informed his guest that 15 men of Toriger had been arrested, and that 14 of them unanimously identified the 15th as the one who struck the blow. "And now," said the governor, "before we send for the prisoners, it will be as well to decide on the sentence. What does His Excellency wish done to them?" The idle man was puzzled. How could he offer an opinion, being ignorant of the Egyptian civil code? And how could the sentence be decided upon before the trial? The governor smiled serenely. "But," he said, "this is the trial." Being an Englishman, it necessarily cost the idle man an effort to realize the full force of this explanation, an explanation which, in its sublime simplicity, epitomized the whole system of the judicial administration of Egyptian law. He hastened, however, to explain that he cherished no resentment against the culprit or the villagers, and that his only wish was to frighten them into a due respect for travellers in general. The governor hereupon invited the Mudir to suggest a sentence, and the Mudir, taking into consideration, as he said, His Excellency's lenient disposition, proposed to award to the 14 innocent men 1 month's imprisonment each, and to the real offender 2 months' imprisonment, with 150 blows of the bastinado. Shocked at the mere idea of such a sentence, the idle man declared that he must have the innocent set at liberty, but consented that the culprit, for the sake of example, should be sentenced to the 150 blows, the punishment to be remitted after the first few strokes had been dealt. Word was now given for the prisoners to be brought in. The jailer marched first, followed by 2 soldiers. Then came the 15 prisoners, I am ashamed to write it, chained neck to neck in single file. One can imagine how the idle man felt at this moment. Sentence being pronounced, the 14 looked as if they could hardly believe their ears, while the 15th, though condemned to 150 strokes, 75 to each foot, specified the governor, was overjoyed to be let off so easily. He was then flung down, his feet were fastened soles uppermost, and 2 soldiers proceeded to execute the sentence. As each blow fell, he cried, God save the governor! God save the Mudir! God save the Howadji! When the 6th stroke had been dealt, the idle man turned to the governor and formally interceded for the remission of the rest of the sentence. The governor, as formally, granted the request, and the prisoners, weeping for joy, were set at liberty. The governor, the Mudir, and the idle man then parted with a profusion of compliments, the governor protesting that his only wish was to be agreeable to the English, and that the whole village should have been bastinadoed had His Excellency desired it. We spent 8 enchanting days at Philae, and it so happened, when the afternoon of the 8th came round, that for the last few hours the writer was alone on the island. Alone, that is to say, with only a sailor in attendance, which was virtual solitude, and Philae is a place to which solitude adds an inexpressible touch of pathos and remoteness. It has been a hot day, and there is dead calm on the river. My last sketch finished, I wander slowly round from spot to spot, saying farewell to Pharaoh's bed, to the painted columns, to every terrace and palm and shrine and familiar point of view. I peep once again into the mystic chamber of Osiris. I see the sunset for the last time from the roof of the temple of Isis. Then, when all that wondrous flush of rose and gold has died away, comes the warm afterglow. No words can paint the melancholy beauty of Philae at this hour. The surrounding mountains stand out jagged and purple against a pale amber sky. The Nile is glassy. Not a breath, not a bubble, troubles the inverted landscape. Every palm is twofold, every stone is doubled. The big boulders in midstream are reflected so perfectly that it is impossible to tell where the rock ends and the water begins. The temples, meanwhile, have turned to a subdued golden bronze, and the pylons are peopled with shapes that glow with fantastic life, and look ready to step down from their places. The solitude is perfect, and there is a magical stillness in the air. I hear a mother crooning to her baby on the neighboring island, a sparrow twittering in its little nest in the capital of a column below my feet, a vulture screaming plaintively among the rocks in the far distance. I look, I listen, I promise myself that I will remember it all in years to come, all the solemn hills, these silent colonnades, these deep, quiet spaces of shadow, these sleeping palms. Lingering till it is all but dark, I at last bid them farewell, fearing lest I may behold them no more. End of section 57.